We have our discussant here, Professor Δημήτρης Καιρίδης, an expert in international relations, but also a member of parliament for the governing party of New Democracy. Welcome, Mr. Kairidis.
Thank you for having me here.
Let us start with the main issue in the Eastern Mediterranean at the moment, which is the geopolitics as defined by hydrocarbons, whether they exist, where they exist, who owns them, and who will benefit from their extraction. It will take at least a decade before the East Mediterranean hydrocarbons are turned into a viable commercial product. So, therefore, when we come to this, won't they have become a thing of the past, or at least be towards the demise of the hydrocarbon era? Is there actually a point in vying to develop beyond politics?
It's a very good point, a very good question. There seems to be a misalignment between the realities of energy sources, and especially gas and oil on the one hand, that are on their way out, and the geopolitical rivalries that the discovery and exploitation and commercialization of these resources have brought to this part of the world. I think Eastern Mediterranean has emerged as an important region, but with some very distinct geopolitical challenges ahead that have to do with a number of factors. One has to do with the weakening of the presence of the United States in the area.
We'll come to this a bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second has to do obviously with the civil wars in the Arab world. We have a proliferation of them in places like Iraq, Syria, Libya, further away in Yemen, and potentially even in Lebanon, which have created sources of instability that can suck in the regional stability. And the third, which is very important and one cannot neglect, is the ambition of Turkey to play it a regional hegemon throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and project its revisionist, aggressive ambitions to the whole area, to the detriment of not only Greece and Cyprus, but other littoral states, including the most important Arab country, which is Egypt. On top of these three structural changes, we have the discovery of those oil and gas, mainly gas deposits offshore in Egypt and Israel, possibly in Cyprus. We have already some deposits there, and we have to see about Greece and the rest.
You have set out the full array of issues that exist in the Eastern Mediterranean, so I will try to come to each one of them separately. We know that a significant amount of natural gas reserves has been discovered by Israel, by Egypt, and in Cyprus. Quantity-wise, they're probably enough to cover, if not the entirety, at least a large part of Europe's needs in the future, as natural gas is the selected transition fuel. However, their economic viability depends very much on whether the Russian gas keeps flowing into Europe. So is it mainly an economic project or a political project attached to the new global outlook, whereby Europe and the West needs to cut ties energy-wise with Russia?
You can never separate politics from this kind of economics. By the way, our over-dependence on Russian gas was not only an economic project making commercial sense because it was abundant and fairly cheap compared to the alternatives, but it was also a political project to bind Russia with Europe and the West through this interdependence. And I think the Germans especially had invested a lot on making sure that Russia stays within the fold. Obviously, this has gone now up in pieces with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Decoupling from Russia is not only a commercial necessity because of the way that Russia has behaved, blackmailing Europe through gas, but also a political imperative as a consequence of the war. And so Europe is looking for alternative sources, and the Eastern Mediterranean can provide one. It cannot be the only one because we have huge needs to replace this Russian gas, but obviously together with other sources from Algeria, Qatar, the United States, obviously Norway, it can play a role.
Since we're there, the East Med, the gas pipeline, aims to connect Israel and the Cypriot oil, gas fields to Europe via Greece and Italy. It's had a bumpy road until now. The parameters have changed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Is it still a viable project? And in the future, we will have some sort of Russian gas flowing into Europe. We know, as you explained, we need to reduce considerably Europe's dependence, but we already see a build-up of alternative infrastructure in namely FSRUs, like Alexandroupolis, which will be a main hub, but also in Germany. Will there still be need for gas quantities to flow into Europe from the Eastern Mediterranean?
Yes, we are building very fast those alternatives. Alexandroupolis will be ready next year. Germany has already, out of nothing, produced one terminal in the North Sea, importing LNG into Germany. It had none before. I believe that it is viable, but of course this is a commercial decision. The governments of Israel, Cyprus and Greece are supportive and remain supportive, but it is up to the market to decide. Obviously it's a big investment, and there is some concern that by the time the pipeline is ready, sometime in 2030 for example, gas quantities will start to be less and less in use, and so there is this concern. Obviously we have other infrastructure to work on as well, the interconnectors, electricity interconnectors that bring green energy. So on top of the transition fuel, which is gas, we have the long-term investment that does make absolute sense, which is to interconnect Greece with Egypt and Greece with Israel, and to make sure that we get the green energy, electricity from these parts of the world through solar and other means.
Well, exactly. The interweaving of Greek, Cypriot, Israeli and Egyptian networks, infrastructures, including gas pipelines, electricity through submerged cables, is a game changer in the region. And let us now come to the elephant in the room, this restless elephant, which is Turkey. Can Turkey remain forever outside this sort of grid?
Nobody wants to keep Turkey outside. Turkey is welcome to this kind of cooperation.
But on what premises, of course?
But on the basis of international law, obviously, and of respect of the sovereign rights of everybody. Now, let me remind you that, obviously, you know it very well, that Turkey doesn't recognize the Republic of Cyprus. Now, when you look at the Eastern Mediterranean, the first thing you notice, so that we don't get lost in the details, the first thing that you notice is an island in the middle. It's called Cyprus. There can be no Eastern Mediterranean without Cyprus. Cyprus is the hub, the main point, the focal point of the Eastern Mediterranean. So we we are confronted with the sad realities of the Cypriot problem that remains unresolved for so many years since the Turkish invasion in 1974. But,
so basically you're arguing that international law, we know how hard it is to implement, and that Turkey has not the best of records in implementing international law. Can there be, in your view, no agreement that would make Turkey come into and couple itself with the existing networks and make part of this arrangement without the Cypriot issue being solved, first of all, and then can it exist, such an agreement? Can Greece adhere to such an agreement without the solution of the Aegean or the continental shelf?
There was a hope in the beginning that these deposits can bring us closer together and create a peace dividend rather than a rivalry or increase the already existing rivalry. By the way, we have signed a lot of agreements based on international law in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Cypriot exclusive economic zone has been delineated with Egypt and Israel, Israel now with Lebanon, Israel with Egypt, and that's why we have these explorations. It's obviously Greece with Egypt and Greece with Italy, etc., etc. The outlier in this whole process is Turkey. It is the only country that has not signed a legal agreement with anybody, and it has positions that go not only against international law, but against geographic logic with this agreement with Libya.
Yes, obviously. And only yesterday or 2 days ago, the European Parliament has called for this agreement to be revoked. So, is there a path for it? Does Turkey, in your view, see this agreement as implementable in practice long term, or is it more of a card in view of a negotiation?
This is a good point, but I'm not into psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. What I know is that it's an official policy of Turkey, and it is part of a broader policy called the Blue Homeland, the Mevlet. Now my brain, okay, the Blue Homeland. And the Blue Homeland says that Turkey controls most of Eastern Mediterranean to the detriment of the exclusive economic zones and continental shelf and sovereign rights of Greece, Cyprus, and others, mainly Greece and Cyprus. So we have a polemical doctrine, a doctrine of conflict, a doctrine of war, as adopted, unfortunately, recently, as official policy in Ankara, in ways that it wasn't before. It was thought too extreme, too radical, too marginal. And I think this is the main problem that we currently are faced with in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have one country that feels that it is isolated. It does not play with the others, the Egyptians, the Israelis, the Cypriots and the Greeks, and instead of wondering why, it doubles down on its aggression through that doctrine and through the implementation of the doctrine, that is the agreement with Libya, that is the constant questioning of Greek sovereignty over Greek islands, of things that were certainly an escalation compared to what we had until recently. We had a difficult relationship. This has become even more so with Turkey recently.
This is how things are. And in the next few months we can expect no significant change. But Turkey has an election in 2023. Yes. And I wonder, this doctrine, this new world view by Turkey, is it something that is directly linked only to Mr. Erdogan as a person or as a leader, the autocratic leader we know he is? Or is it a new spirit that will survive Mr. Erdogan, whatever his electoral fate?
The doctrine emanated from the most extreme Kemalist circles, and it was adopted by the Islamists of Mr. Erdogan recently, and today it has been accepted by most of the political spectrum of Turkey, including the Kemalist opposition. This is the reality. But on top of which, the doctrine expresses something much more long-term that has not been fully understood in the West. It expresses the delinking of Turkey from the West. Its search for autonomy, for an autonomous role. Its search for regional glory as a regional superpower and one of the big powers in the world. It turns Turkey away from the West towards the East, Eurasia. It's part of the Eurasian, of the Eurasianists in Ankara, and it further undemocratizes Turkey internally. It turns Turkey authoritarian. So it is part and parcel of a wider trend that we have been seeing the last 10 years, and certainly since the failed coup of 2016 in Turkey.
The reversal of their European ambition.
Exactly, and of the democratic acquis that Turkey, with all the problems and the deficits, obviously, had managed to acquire. And we teach in international relations that democracies might not fight with themselves, among themselves. Dictatorships and authoritarian regimes can ignore public opinion. The most difficult and the most dangerous situation is the in-betweens, the hybrid regimes, the regimes that de-democratize, the reverse transitions, where public opinion still plays a role, because in Turkey, they, as you said, they're going to have elections, and Erdogan needs to have this public opinion, but it's a public opinion that is easily manipulated, it's volatile, it's emotional, it's explosive, because there are no counterweights constitutional, there is no justice system independent, there is no freedom of the press independent, there is no parliament, real parliament, where you can have these debates. You don't have the institutions, all power has been concentrated in the hands of one man, the president, and the democratic system has been degraded into what we call electoral democracy, superficial democracy. It's all about the elections and how to win them. And in this environment, populism, and especially ethno-populism, referring to the glory of the nation, etc., has a lot of room to flourish. We have these problems of populism even in advanced democracies, in mature democracies, like the ones here in Europe and in America, let alone in places like Turkey. So we have a very explosive mix inside Turkey that makes its foreign behavior much more volatile, much less restrained than what we used to. And I think true believers in Greek-Turkish rapprochement, people who have spent their lives trying to bring the two countries,
deeply disappointed at the moment,
are not only deeply disappointed, but I think they don't fully grasp the structural changes within Turkey that make that rapprochement these days so much more difficult.
One final question, as we're approaching the end of this discussion, on an issue critical, in my view, that you have touched upon at the start of our discussion, the role of the US. We see that many tremors within the region are caused by the fact that the US had started withdrawing from the East Mediterranean and the Middle East. How critical is the presence of a president like Biden instead of a president like Trump for the stabilizing role of the US in the region?
Many people here in Greece, and at some point they might have been majorities, demonstrated and fought for the famous Yankees go home, believing that the world will be better this way. I was never of that opinion. And I would always tell my students that be afraid of the time when Yankees will go home, truly, because they decide themselves to go home. And we are in such a situation the last years, not only because of Trump. It's a trend that started long before him, under Obama, and it has to do with a number of things. We see it in Iraq, we saw it in Afghanistan recently under Biden, and we see it, what is happening in Syria these days would be unthinkable 20 years ago with America being absent, right? So we have a reality. Obviously, Trump would have been, a second Trump presidency would have been a disaster for NATO. There is no doubt about that. He had said so. He had said that he doesn't believe in NATO, he doesn't want the Atlantic Alliance. His main enemy was the Germans and the Chinese, but the Germans and...
Macron almost said that they would leave.
And
that it didn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. So I think it was good that Biden was elected, and it was good that we had this midterm result for coordination of the West and for stability in the region. For the region in particular, when it comes to Eastern Mediterranean, I have to be frank and give some credit to Pompeo as well. Because in his later years, the last year in office, Pompeo, who managed to survive Trump presidency, because most of the other people kept on...
Constant changes, yes.
Right,
yes.
like musical chairs. But Pompeo, for some reason, managed to stay on. He initiated, together with the Congress, this tougher line on Turkey with sanctions because of S-400, etc. But overall, I think we want the old America that would look outwards rather than the inward-looking, nativistic, populist, nationalist, America first kind of America that, for me at least, I have no doubt, would be detrimental to world order and to regional order for all the mistakes and all the deficits and the criticisms that one can make towards American foreign policy.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. We could discuss forever. But thank you very much, Professor Kairidis, for your insights, and thank you all for joining this discussion.